Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Kernels of Truth, brought to you by Progress Kentucky. This week, we're going to cover an early Christmas present to public schools from the Kentucky Supreme Court. We're going to share how the crowded GOP governor's primary just added a little bit of shoulder room for the wacky anti-Andy crew. Then we're going to discuss an important fight over a natural gas pipeline proposal, which would endanger the protected Bernheim Forest, with our guests, concerned citizen Deborah Novgorodoff and Terrell Holder with the Greater Louisville Sierra Club. And then we're going to wrap up with a really important call to action on that same subject. But first, are you ready to help turn Kentucky purple? We saw what happened on November 8th. The GOP rode a wave of gerrymandered districts to build an even larger supermajority in Frankfort, despite voters strongly rejecting an anti-abortion ballot measure. If you want a Commonwealth that works for all of us, join Progress Kentucky, support our campaign to turn our Commonwealth purple, make a donation at our Secure Act Blue website, and help us spread the word that we're tired of the GOP ignoring the needs of regular folks in Kentucky. We think our Commonwealth is worth fighting for. So now let's check in with our co-hosts. Let us know who you are, where you are, and what does your protest sign say today? You there on the internet, we mean you too. I want to read what your protest sign says, so put it in the chat while we're sharing ours. So I'm Aaron. I'm coming to you from Chilesburg, which is, of course, a lovely subdivision in Lexington, where I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit let down by our holiday lights. I don't think their holiday lights are quite as spectacular as they were just last year. But otherwise, it's a fine place to be. Let's see. And my protest sign says today, quote, "The entire nation knows who's responsible for that day," end quote. Arrest Trump now. And bonus points if you know who that quote is from. So that's me. I'm going to now throw it over to Doug for your message from Harrison County.
Thank you, Aaron. Yes, I'm from Harrison County, Kentucky. I really like your sign, and arrest Trump now. I can vote for that. My sign says I'm going to stick on this for quite a while. We need voting reform across the board. Yeah. And Nema, I'll turn it over to you.
You know, guys, it's really weird. I don't really feel like I'm protesting anything today, which is kind of bizarre, but I'm kind of mellow right now because as I'm going into my vacation, I will say this. My sign, if I was protesting anything, would be, holy moly, it's cold. I know you guys have been talking about it. We've been talking about it over here. Remember to check on the elderly and anybody else that might have to be out in these elements, and also on your pets. Just to give you a heads up, our fantastic governor also is apparently shutting down state government offices at 2:00 tomorrow. So, and Andy we trust. So, but yes, stay warm, Kentucky. And I'm coming to you from Lexington, the beautiful Kenwood area.
Lovely. So yeah, I don't know what's wrong with you that you've got nothing to protest. But I guess protesting the weather is like almost about as good as
the cloud.
That's almost as useful as me protesting, Mitch. Really, I think it has about as much of an impact. So, anyone, any guesses of where that quote that is on my sign, where that came from?
It was Mitch, right? Didn't he say that? Yeah.
The entire nation knows who's responsible for that day. He didn't say the arrest Trump now part. That was mine. But yeah, the entire nation knows who's responsible for that. I do get the vibe that Mitch is just done with Trump.
Yeah, I think he's over it completely. Yeah.
Completely over. All right. So I'm disappointed that I did not get any holiday visit tips for Harrison County, but I'm sure you can put some in the chat later, Doug.
Yeah.
All right, so we got a jam-packed show. We got a number of stories we want to cover, and so we should probably just leap right into news of the week. And I believe, unless I'm mistaken greatly, Doug, you got the first story.
Yes, I have the first story. I don't know if there's any logic behind that or not. Maybe the first shall be last, or the first shall be best, or something like that. My story is about the Kentucky Supreme Court ruling that basically told the legislature that we don't agree with your charter school legislation. And how did we get here? The Commonwealth of Kentucky was admitted into the Union as a 15th state in 1792 and has had 4 constitutions, with the last being adopted in 1891. The important section, Section 183, states the General Assembly shall, by appropriate legislation, provide for an efficient system of common schools throughout the state. While the term common schools is not defined in the Constitution, I did find this definition. A common school was a public school in the U.S. in the 19th century. Common schools were quasi-public, originally mandated by colonial and subsequently by state and governments. They offered an elementary level of schooling. Section 184 is a section that all 7 of the Kentucky Supreme Court justices, along with a previous ruling by Judge Philip Shepard, relied upon. The ruling states no sum in Section 184. It states no sum shall be raised or collected for education other than in common schools until the question of taxation is submitted to the legal voters and the majority of the votes cast at said election shall be in favor of such taxation. So in my mind, legislators could put the vote to the general public through a constitutional amendment, or perhaps through some method of voting for a taxation scheme as provided for in House Bill 563. This past November, we had 2 constitutional amendments proposed by the legislature, and the voters voted both of those down. The Constitution states not more than 4 amendments shall be voted upon at any one time. If 2 or more amendments shall be submitted at the same time, they shall be submitted in such manner that the electors shall vote for or against each of the amendments separately. In my mind, could the GA propose an amendment that stated, do you believe the Kentucky Constitution should allow for money to be spent on all K through 12 grade schools? If they said all schools, then that would include common and private. Or perhaps they might say, do you want public tax funds to be used by private schools? Or could they propose to change the definition of common schools to include private schools? I'm certain they're thinking of just about any way that they can to try to overcome this ruling. And I really think the legislature may try to amend the Constitution utilizing a constitutional amendment. They are not going to drop their push to create a charter school system in Kentucky. Additionally, this ruling may affect implementation of House Bill 9, which is commonly known as a charter school bill that was passed in the 2021 Republican-controlled legislature, and that set up the mechanism for charter school to be approved in Northern Kentucky. We reported on this last week. Northern Kentucky University declined to oversee a charter school, and now it is up to local school districts to vote whether or not they wish to allow public school funding to go to a charter school. That seems to be a solid no to me, but we shall see how this plays out. I think the Kentucky Supreme Court ruling would be a guidance for any school district when looking at enforcing HB 9. It should impact that ruling if anyone sued. Here are some comments from both sides of the political spectrum. Attorney General Daniel Cameron, who sought to have the Franklin Circuit Court ruling overturned. He can't try to have the Kentucky Supreme Court ruling overturned because they have the final say. But he stated, we're saddened that parents across the Commonwealth won't be able to use the needs-based funding provided by the Kentucky Education Opportunity Account Program to expand learning opportunities for their children. Our office is committed to helping ensure the best educational opportunity for every child. Governor Beshear posted his reaction on social media. Today's ruling by the Kentucky Supreme Court couldn't be more clear. State funding for private or charter schools is unconstitutional, period. It's time for the General Assembly to invest in our public schools, our teachers, and our children. Let me be the first to say that this is going to be an issue in the gubernatorial race. We know that Governor Beshear will be on the side of that public money can't be used for private schools. Will every Republican running for election fall on the side of allowing private businesses to receive public tax revenue? Will there be candidates who will try to cater to those Republican voters who do not approve? Those are questions that may well be answered starting in January when the General Assembly meets. I'll turn it back to you, Aaron.
So, yeah, I think this is a huge story, right? So, obviously the charter school movement in Kentucky had been confounded a number of times, but then in the last session, they had a very narrow but victory nonetheless in getting this legislation through. And now this Supreme Court decision, throws it all out, right? Throws the funding mechanism at least out, right? So that seems like that's it. And that was the big fight in the last session. Nema, you paid I think closer attention to this than anybody. Anybody in this live stream for sure. What's your take on that decision and what it's going to mean?
Well, first of all, we're tickled, obviously, that the Supreme Court unanimously decided. They can't be saying this was runaway liberal judges, activist judges or anything like that. No, this was the entire Supreme Court of Kentucky. And it was a pretty loud and clear message. I think one of my favorite lines was, you can't sell people a mule and call it a horse, even if you think they need the mule. And so, that's a perfect way to do it. What's been going on in Kentucky, and let's just be honest here, the Republicans used to not hate public education as much as they do. That's just the truth. And there's a lot of Republicans, particularly in the Mountain Caucus, who still understand that public education is the key to success, and is what is needed in that area. Let's keep this in mind. Not one member, not one on the floor for the House vote of the Mountain Caucus voted for this bill. Not one of them. And why they didn't do that is they clearly still value public ed. And listen, you all, public education is one of, if not the largest employer of a lot of these smaller mountain communities. So it is literally the lifeblood. You're either in public education, or you're a nurse and you're traveling to whatever hospital, or you're in, healthcare. So the Mountain Caucus has held true to this. The Mountain Caucus has held true. Anybody that's from the 606 knows the importance of public education. And what we're seeing is we're seeing this constant, we're being told this is what we need, whenever we're saying, no, this is what we need. And we were not surprised at all in 120 AFT about the outcome of this. We told them it was unconstitutional when they did it. There were people in the committee that were Republicans that were saying, this is unconstitutional, but they did it anyway. And so here's my question about all this. When are they going to learn that public education is very much appreciated and needed in the state? But when you've got these outside interests that are coming in, and always wanting to make money off of basically kids, is what this is, then you're always going to have this. And we've also got all the attacks on public education that we've heard constantly, and they're trying to ride this wave. I believe what Doug says is going to happen. It will happen. I believe they are going to try to change the Constitution to clear a way for this. But I want to be clear. Our Constitution is a document that we should take a lot more seriously than trying to slap silly constitutions or amendments on every year. These are the same people that wrap themselves in the United States Constitution, refuse to let any of it go, And yet they absolutely wipe their hind ends with the Kentucky Constitution every session. I have never seen anything so crazy in my life. The duplicity of it all is disgusting and maddening. And basically, here's what's going to happen. Come at public education again, and people are going to come at you again in Frankfort, and we are going to raise hell. What we need is to be heard. And when I say heard, I'm not talking about superintendents. I'm not talking about principals. I'm talking about the people that are actually in the buildings that do the work every single day. And until we start listening to those folks who actually know what's going on, it's going to be this constant circular firing squad. But Kentucky needs to wake up and realize that our public education system is the lifeblood for a lot of our counties. And the Mountain Caucus gets it. I don't know what's going on with Western Kentucky, but they need to get on board and realize what's happening to public education. And here's one more thing. These vouchers that they were trying to push off, which is what they were. They weren't, opportunity tax credits. No. You were taking dollar for dollar out of the general fund and you were giving it back. I mean, that's taking money out of, and I'm glad the Supreme Court ruled that way. But here's the key. The key is those vouchers we're not going to be able to use in every single county. There's not any private schools in some of these counties. And so it's always a bait and switch with these people in Frankfort. It's always a shell game. It's always trying to put lipstick on a pig. And they're going to name it something fancy. And they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And, I hope that after their crushing defeat and the last 2 amendments that they tried, that Kentuckians are waking up and saying, why are we always trying to change this Constitution? How about we do what we need to do? And we've told people we were going to do, and let's fund public education.
Yeah. It's so interesting that, so far, the folks have not quite made the connection, apparently. They're voting against the constitutional amendments, but not voting against the people who vote to put the constitutional amendments in front of the voters, right? So they have not quite connected those dots yet. Just like they're like, yeah, we actually do think there should be a constitutional right to an abortion in Kentucky, but didn't get rid of anyone who was an advocate for getting rid of that constitutional right. So it seemed like, obviously gerrymandering plays a role, but I think a lot of it is just, we gotta do a little bit more to make it clear who's behind these efforts, right?
Right, they're just not coming at his face, right? Like
yeah,
they're
right.
just not showing up.
They don't just automatically land on your ballot. No, there's a process for putting them there.
So we got to do that. Yeah. So I mean, but ultimately, I think a statewide vote on something like this is going to be a lot harder, a harder way to go. And I think we've shown that in the last 2 amendments that were tried and with the governor's race, it's a lot easier when you've gerrymandered stuff to get your votes as it is to whenever you open up the whole state. Because I'm going to tell you, Louisville shows up, Fayette shows up, Northern Kentucky shows up, and that's what needs to happen. So, and I'll just update you guys. We filed an ethics complaint against Representative Kim Banta over these shenanigans with these bills. And that investigation is ongoing. And you all know that ethics investigations could last forever. But the fact that the investigation is still going on gives us hope that she's at least going to be given a slap on the wrist or at least reprimanded, because we've got to stop these kind of backdoor shenanigans that are obvious conflicts from happening. But we still have bourbon owners who are voting on bourbon. We have, until we start looking at ourselves and cleaning up our own backyards with this kind of stuff, we're going to continue to have these fights every year.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. There's a lot of conflicts of interest running around. In fact, so many of these representatives seem to get back there so they can take care of their own interest. It is just a little disheartening, but really, elections have consequences. And the fact that we put, we got some great Supreme Court justices apparently, and they saw through this. But that point that it was unanimous. Like clearly, this is not a liberal. No matter however you want to slice it, Kentucky does not have a liberal Supreme Court but the folks who tried to make it a highly partisan race did get beaten down, which was
well. And
awesome.
I would say this: I was watching KET on Monday, and they're already talking about making judges races, city council races, and school board races partisan, because that's the only way they are winning is the straight ticket vote. So, and again, these are institutions that were set up this way to keep politics out. And if the shoe was on the other foot, this would not be happening. As far as like, oh, we need to do no. So they're basically trying to smother us at every single level. And we better pay attention, because I don't want my city council being partisan. I don't want my mayor's race being partisan. Lexington just voted in a Republican again. I mean, Mayor Gorton is a Republican, registered Republican. And, she rolled this time around. So, those are the things that we need to keep out. We need to keep
and I think Doug's sign about voting rights, this is something that I think Progress Kentucky is really interested in furthering, is a bit more of a kind of a democracy agenda. And I think you nailed it, Nema. That straight ticket voting is just really problematic, right? Because it doesn't, you don't have to make the decision about the actual candidate. You don't have to do your homework about the actual candidate. Some people would like to remove the R and the D from the ballot. That's, seems unlikely to happen. But I do think, there's straight party voting is a relic we need to get rid of. There's a lot of other things we could be doing to make our democracy a little bit more vibrant and robust here in Kentucky. And I think, we'll be putting some ideas together and find some potential supporters, kind of collaborators, because then Progress Kentucky, as much as you might think we're an amazing machine that can get a lot of things done in the state, we're going to need a lot of friends and supporters to kind of push that type of an agenda. But I think, let's call them out. They say they want to make it harder to cheat and easier to vote. Well, there's a lot of things they can do to make it a lot easier to vote in Kentucky, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's one thing we really want to spend a little bit of time on as an organization. We'll cover that stuff as we go. I think we need to roll into our next story, because we do have some really important guests we want to get to, an important story to cover there. But moving on, though, we did see the news this week that Savannah Maddox has dropped out. So that Liberty wing of the Republican Party, Savannah Maddox, has dropped out of the governor's race, leaving just 25,000 candidates, I guess. No, it was definitely still a lot of folks in that race. I was surprised to see that she cited fundraising, the fact that she was not able to fundraise enough to give her ideas the proper attention. She raised over $200,000 for a campaign that most people don't even know that they're actually running yet, right? There's still people not paying attention whatsoever. So that was a significant amount of money, but apparently you need a lot more to convince people to vote for, the kind of liberty version of the Republican Party. But, it still leaves a very crowded field. Attorney General Dan Cameron, Commissioner of Agriculture Ryan Quarles, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN and Canada, Kelly Craft, that Somerset Mayor, Alan Keck, Mike Harmon, the auditor, and then, I guess she's left the kind of fully crazy right-wing lane to retired Northern Kentucky attorney Eric Dieters. Is he retired because he got disbarred, or is he retired, just in poor standing as an attorney? But that's the guy who I think has hosted a bunch of MAGA, amazing MAGA rallies throughout the state, because he believes that that's his core. But so $200,000 is not enough to compete. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's not going to be enough to compete against folks like Kelly Craft, who can self-fund to a staggering degree. But it does seem like an awfully early withdrawal. Some people say, well, this could making it easier for somebody like Matt Bevin to have a clear lane, and maybe was there some idea that she was doing this to create that lane for him or clear that lane for him? I have no idea. But this is some conjecture from the article in the Herald Leader that the Liberty Wing candidate for treasurer, of course, the anti-COVID activist and coffee shop owner Andrew Cooper-Ryder. He said 2 names he mentioned that aren't even in the race: former Governor Matt Bevin, Louisville pizza industry celebrity Papa John Shatner. He thinks that Bevin could be getting in. He's heard that John Shatner could get in the race since he's got resources, and with Savannah not in the race, it could open up a lane. So those are 2 names that, obviously everyone's talking about Matt Bevin. I had not heard Papa John's name before, not read it in print, so that was a little bit surprising to me. But who the heck knows what's going to happen in this race? Everyone get in, come on, everyone but Savannah. And then the one person that did get it, we're excited to have a name in the statewide office hunt, is Buddy Wheatley. So Representative Buddy Wheatley, of course, who was kind of one of the just heartbreaking losses, I will say. I think really an important leader in Frankfort rather for the Democrats. He was very much gerrymandered, made his district very, very challenging, and in fact wasn't able to pull it off. But a lot of folks really liked him. A lot of folks thought his kind of democracy ideals are really, he's good ideas, smart guy, and so he's now running for Secretary of State as I think the only Democratic candidate so far. Again, besides, Andy got in, Colonel Pam running for Attorney General, and now Buddy Wheatley for Secretary of State. So, slowly and surely building some great Democratic candidates for those constitutional offices. But yeah, that did want to cover that story quickly. Any thoughts about either Savannah getting out or Buddy getting in, folks?
I've got a couple of things I can say. Savannah Maddox, a Republican complaining about too much money in politics. I think she could have just said, if I had all the money, I would be there. Buddy Wheatley, he's a very fine gentleman, fine person. I saw him, I was at the Public Pension Oversight Board meeting this past Monday, and the legislators were saying they were going to miss him, and thought that they would hopefully see him around somewhere in some other capacity. And, he didn't make any comments, but I guess, he filed the next day, and I'm excited for him.
Yeah, Savannah sorry. I just can't. So, she's going to be back, just like, a raging case of herpes. She'll flare up again, so, whatever. She'll be back. And Buddy, great guy. I think very well thought of in Frankfort. Obviously, so highly thought of that they had to gerrymander him out. So, but yeah, nothing shocks me about this field that's going in. It's going to be wild. Absolutely wild. I'm ready to sit back and watch it and watch them eat each other, because that's exactly, how it's going to be. So, we'll see. But, they're wily. So we'll see what happens. I'd love for Bevin to get back in. I've not been the same since he left.
Yeah, Savannah Maddox is not going anywhere. She will still have her crazy opportunities to share her ideals as a representative there in Frankfort. She does a good job of commanding attention, because what she says is so outlandish that people have got to wait, what? So yeah, we'll have our chance to cover her, I'm sure. But yeah, as he said, it's gonna be a heck of a race. Cannot wait for those debates. Yeah. All right, so we need to move on into kind of a sober story that we did want to touch on before we move to our guests. So Nema, I don't know, you got a kind of more of a firsthand experience with this story, so I wanted to leave it to you to share.
Yeah, I hate, we hate to bring something like this up, and we hate when something like this happens, obviously. But anybody who has been paying attention in Frankfort for the last few years, especially on the Senate side, probably knows what I'm getting ready to talk about as far as Senator Karen Berg's impassioned speeches that she would give on the Senate floor in regards to LGBTQ plus the community and the support that we needed to give them, and to stop the hate. And, Senator Berg's son recently passed away, and there's no words to say just the grief and the sorrow that I think any one of us who saw her talk about her son on the floor, as a parent, as a mother, as just a human being, there's no way you could not listen to her and know that she was speaking from this deep, deep love for her son. And my understanding, I never met Henry, but my understanding was he spoke up and out he was a fierce advocate for the trans community and the LGBTQ plus community. And I just want, just for me and from Progress Kentucky, to send our sincere condolences to Senator Berg. Your statements on the floor made an impact on a lot of people, made a lot of people, others, think deeply about this issue. And so it's really important that we honor that memory, and that we thank Senator Berg for sharing that, her personal story with us. Also, I have to say this, you all, if you need help, any kind of mental health issues that you're having with, if you're struggling with anything, please reach out for help. I believe you can dial 988 now. Is that correct, guys? On the phone, and that is a hotline to help with any of those issues. But please check in on each other, you all. We can stop all this stuff. We got to stop bullying kids, y'all, and people that it has to stop. And so I just wanted to say a little something about Henry and Senator Berg. I know that she's want to let her know she's in our thoughts. A lot of people I know are deeply saddened by this news.
Yeah, it's just tragic, absolutely tragic. And yeah, that is 988. If anyone is struggling, share that number with them. It's easier than it's ever been to be able to get to that resource. But it is, I think, more necessary than ever. It just seems like there's a lot of weaponized hate out there, and people are being, punished for being who they are. At the same point, like we as a society seem to one hand are willing to open up more than we ever have. There's that kind of very hard response, on the other side, this backlash that, is encouraging people to come out strongly against folks who are courageously trying to live their real, honest, authentic lives. And that is just tragic to watch. And our heart, as you said, Nema, our hearts go out to Senator Berg, like just really horrible. So we do need to get to our guests, because this is a really important story that, I think we can learn a lot from. As folks, know, we like to, weigh in on environmental issues from time to time here on Kernels of Truth. So we've fortunate enough to find a couple of, fantastic folks who are calling attention to an important conservation habitat fight happening, a battle over an LG&E plan to build a high-pressure methane gas pipeline. I think theoretically for the Beam Suntory company, the gas pipeline would cut through Bernheim Auditorium and Research Forest's Cedar Grove Wildlife Corridor, several farms, crossing at least 6 major waterways, impacting wetlands, sinkholes, and habitat for more than half a dozen threatened or endangered species, in addition to removing nearly 40 acres of forest, according to LG&E, their own filing. So discuss the pipeline, the battle for Bernheim Forest. We're glad to have with us this week the Sierra Club's Greater Louisville Group Chair, Terrell Holder, concerned citizen Deborah Potts Novgorodoff, who have been working to oppose the pipeline. We were connected to these fine folks by Lane Boldman, who's been on the show in the past, the executive director of the Kentucky Conservation Committee. Deb, Terrell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, this is a really important fight. I think a lot of people have been to Bernheim Forest. It does an amazing job of helping to educate people about forest habitats and the value of these areas here in Kentucky. There's like art displays. It's just a wonderful, wonderful resource for communities across Kentucky. Tell us, a little bit. What's going on here? What's the story of this project? And I don't know who wants to just give us the backstory a little bit more, Terrell or Deb.
Well, I do know the fight's been going on. Sorry, I've got a tickle in my throat all of a sudden. The fight has been going on since 2018. Well, at least I think some of the landowners have been fighting this for 6 years. And LG&E has been working to condemn their land. Terrell, you have a pretty clear sense of exactly how this pipeline is intended to run. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's about 2017, 2018, and they filed for permission to build a pipeline through this area from Mount Washington to just about the intersection of I-65 and Kentucky Highway 245, which is the road you would get off to go to Bernheim or Bardstown if you were going that way. And most of the people along the pipeline have already agreed to the LG&E's terms to condemn their land. There's a few holdouts, but particularly Bernheim is fighting it for a number of reasons. And it's really an issue that spans several levels. The first level is, well, do we have a need for the pipeline, first of all? Secondly, there's a risk to wildlife. There's a risk to water, and the people that live along the pipeline are at risk too because of the unique terrain, the karst terrain with sinkholes and caves underneath the land. So there's a greater risk along this route than there might be on other routes. But even beyond the risk to the water and the people and the wildlife, it's absolutely a backwards step when it comes to trying to reduce greenhouse gases, which everybody knows we need to start doing at some point. And they're just adding, over the years, they'll add hundreds of thousands, if not millions of tons of CO2 to the atmosphere in the effort to build this pipeline.
Right. And so it is definitely, kind of from our perspective, we know that pipelines leak, pipelines have issues. We've seen explosions not that long ago here in Kentucky. You kind of point out that it might not even be needed. What's the assessment right now about how critical this pipeline is to the company's customers?
I'd love to speak to that. I think that's very questionable. LG&E says it's needed. I think there is court discovery saying that a lot of this power would go for Jim Beam, at least in the first 5 years. However, Jim Beam has now come out and said that they're developing biodigesters, which is going to satisfy most of their power needs. So if Beam is off the table, and that's an if, it's kind of nebulous exactly who the end users of this will be. LG&E says they've had to turn away 500 customers, but they've never been forthcoming about who those customers are. So we know there's a lot of development in Bullitt County. On the one hand, development done well is good for people's jobs, but it needs to be done sustainably. And I would just argue that running a pipeline through Bernheim Forest is not in the least sustainable or ecologically wise. It's for the reasons that Terrell talked about, and we can expand on some of those. I mean, we have a letter from the Center for Biological Diversity that identifies, let me get these numbers correct, 12 endangered species. And we know there are 4 threatened species. So that are in this area. There are 13 species of bats, and bats are having a rough time. One of the threatened species is the long-eared bat, and that's just been listed as threatened. And they use that whole corridor for their roosting, for their nurseries. They use the sinkholes and the caves underground for that. So it's a real threat to the wildlife in the area, and I think a real tragedy.
Yeah,
so
it's really
back to your question. Need, we don't know. We don't, LG&E, tell us, what is the need that you're saying is going to be addressed with this pipeline? Not clear.
Yep. Terrell, you're gonna jump in there?
I was going to say that from a wildlife perspective, the pipeline is actually a double whammy, because the construction of the pipeline itself is going to cause harm, just because of the number of streams that it's crossing, and because of the unique drainage issues where water runs underground, it runs through caves, and ultimately all that flow is to the Salt River. So it's going to affect all the property that's north of the pipeline, and I guess north and west of the pipeline, all the way up to the Salt River. The other whammy is that over the years, they're going to have to maintain the pathway. So there's going to be heavy equipment in there, not always, but year after year after year, heavy equipment will be going through that corridor from Mount Washington to I-65 to make sure that space is clear. And that disturbs the wildlife corridor, and it also continues to disturb the water in the area. And I guess finally, the chance of a catastrophic failure under normal circumstances, properly developed, properly sited, a pipeline like this is not likely to blow up. But with this kind of terrain, I think the risk is somewhat higher, and other utility companies have actually told LG&E that they don't recommend this particular path. They wouldn't do it.
So lots of habitat for a bunch of different endangered species. We've got the kind of risk of the pipeline itself, the kind of ongoing maintenance of the pipeline, kind of right of way there, to the disruption that's going to provide. Talk a little bit about just, it's not just any farmer's land that they're going to come in and, kind of condemn and take over. This is the Bernheim, Forest, which has, I believe, a conservation easement, right? So this is an area that's supposedly protected for all time. How in the world do you get to site a pipeline through a conservation easement?
Apparently very easily.
Yeah.
This has been, go ahead, Deborah.
No, you go, Terrell.
In the history of, the United States, urban development, suburban development, every community wants to grow. They want to grow their tax base. They want to provide good jobs for their citizens. So these kinds of infrastructure projects tend to get favorable siting by the powers that be, whether it's Public Service Commission, Energy and Environment Cabinet, Army Corps of Engineers. Everybody wants to see the growth, but we do it so fast and so furiously without thought that the damage, as you know from history in the news, last week there was a big pipeline leak. These things fail. They're improperly sited. They disturb people and wildlife, and generally do nothing but continue business as usual while we're trying really, really hard to stop at least to do our part locally to stop a global crisis of both climate and biodiversity. And because these projects are so easy to do, it seems like, and it requires people like us to stand up and say, please, this is wrong, it's immoral. And yet it's happens over and over and over again. And it really, I don't know how much damage from climate-related disasters we're going to have to suffer before unbelievers get on board and start trying to do stuff, because it's not going to be too long where the damages are very severe.
Well, it's hard to accuse Kentucky of being overly aggressive in the march to net zero carbon emissions, right? We definitely have a power grid that is still largely powered by coal. We've got incredibly strong advocates for continued burning of coal. LG&E, I think, just recently announced they got a couple coal fire burners they want to shut down because they don't have the necessary kind of pollution control devices, and it'd be super expensive to do that. So you've got, the coal advocates exploding because, LG&E doesn't want to continue to burn exclusively coal, and they would like to transition a couple of facilities to natural gas, or build natural gas power plants, but then also to add in some solar, which not an enormous amount of solar compared to kind of the existing power generation in the state, or in that investor-owned utility area. But it is I think we're not a state that has proven to be terribly courageous in terms of heading towards net zero. And I wonder your thoughts about if this was a different area, would this be an even more crazy proposal, right? Is it like, do they think kind of like, oh yeah, we can get away with this because it's Kentucky and they don't seem to really care about their carbon emissions, so why wouldn't they want us to bring a natural gas pipeline through a conservation easement? That requires some conjecture, but I'll throw it out there for either of you to answer.
Well, I think it is a very favorable environment in Kentucky for fossil fuel development and continuation, even though there's lip service from LG&E and the state government about the need to do something about emissions. It's not serious.
Yeah, I will say this, and I'm going to throw it to Doug in just a second. That's I'm a huge fan of Andy Beshear, and I feel like he kind of picks his battles fairly wisely. He seems to be very excited about the fact that we're becoming the EV battery manufacturing capital of the country, which is awesome. But one of the benefits of doing EVs is you kind of have the carbon emissions of your transportation sector, but that seems to be. He's really excited about the jobs. I don't know how much he talks about the carbon reductions inherent in that technology. I don't see him spending a lot of political capital, probably wisely, knowing the kind of landscape, but I'd love to see a little more courage in the idea of, Kentucky doing more to ratchet down our carbon emissions. But that's my take on it. But we're also trying to get Andy on the show, so I didn't say that. But yeah, Doug, you have any thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to, you may have already touched on this, but from start to finish, I'm certain LG&E has projected the amount of time that they're going to be on the land, digging up, laying pipeline that's going to be buried how many feet deep, if you have an idea on that. And I think you've already addressed why they need the pipeline, but have they looked at other options? I know they're looking at from point A to point B, but maybe they can get from point A to point B without going through Bernheim.
Yeah, my understanding was initially there were 10 routes proposed, and for whatever reason, and they settled on this one. The only thing I can think about the reason is that it's close to Jim Beam, and Jim Beam was believed to be a primary. In fact, I think there's court discovery, I think I may have mentioned around that, Jim Beam was intended to be a primary user initially. So now, if Jim Beam in fact isn't, can't the route be changed? And I guess talking about LG&E and fossil fuels in Kentucky, I would really like to challenge Andy Bashir, and I'd like to challenge LG&E to think more innovatively. We can do this, folks. You know, we can think about a sustainable future, not just about what puts money in the pockets of the shareholders today. If we think sustainably, we're going to be thinking about what puts money in everybody's pocket down the road. Business expansion is great, done sustainably. Let's think creatively about that. And I really believe there are ways with the biodigesters. My understanding is that some of the farms down there have, maybe I'm off your topic here, Doug, but some of the farms down there have been approached by solar companies, large solar companies, to put large solar farms in on their fields, around which they could continue to have sheep or other kind of farming. But they can't do that if there's a pipeline there. So, you know, this is, again, a double whammy. You know, not only do we not get the solar, but we get a pipeline, you know, that's going to spew gas emissions into the environment for the next, I've heard Mark Worms from Bernheim say, for the next 70 years. So I think I think that is really sad, you know, when we've got the resources and the knowledge and some beginning knowledge to begin to change that tide.
Yep. Thank you, Deb. All right. So Nema, any thoughts you want to share, questions you want to ask? You've been, you've been quiet for a while, which always gets me nervous, but what do you?
No, I was just wondering if it's harder to convince folks, especially in like now. I know it's always been hard to convince folks that we shouldn't litter and shouldn't do all these things. But is it any harder now? Because it seems like we're so focused on what's happening right now, and we don't care about what's happening 10. Oh, there's my cat. Yeah. We don't see, you know, people aren't really they don't really care about the future, the future. It's almost like we're so immediate. So I didn't know if you guys had seen a change in people. It seems like our younger folks are really a lot more invested. Obviously they should be, but we should be too. I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. And I was just wondering if you all have seen any kind of changes in people's mentalities, with this me to, yeah, maybe we do have an issue, just talk about that.
Well, I have to say I have. The further, and it's going to continue to be more, the further we get down this road of climate changes, biological diversity loss, more and more people see that it's happening. I mean, it's not a secret, and it's very, very difficult to deny it, even though some people in our own Congress in Kentucky still continue to deny that it's even happening. But I have seen lots more kids, lots of more of my friends who are not activists are tuning into this and understand we don't always know what to do. And it's going to take not just the activists, it's going to take the businesses and the utility providers and the governments, both local, state, and national, to really put heads together to solve the problem. And I think the biggest problem today in moving forward is the polarization in the political arena. We argue about every little thing and have a very, very difficult focusing on the big picture and the common good.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard to argue that Bernheim Forest is anything but the common good, right? That is an amazing resource. The idea that it would just be so, kind of easily dismissed by this company to try to cite this pipeline through that area, that special area, right, is just it's outrageous. So we've got the Save Bernheim Now website. We put that up on the screen. We'll do it again. Encourage everyone to go sign that petition. We need to get that number up. I think we're not even at 10,000 yet. So come on, people. We should, add your name to that petition for sure, in terms of an opportunity to take action. Are there other things people should do to help weigh in and help this support this effort to protect Bernheim Forest?
Yeah, I'd like to take that question. We have an action button on that website. And under that, we have some letters that you can get in, sample letters to Governor Beshear, to the Public Service Commission, and to John Crockett from LG&E. And I think it's time to engage John Crockett in a dialogue and explain to him, if he doesn't already understand, what a treasure Bernheim is, and how so many of us care so deeply about it. He needs to, if he's going to have a pipeline, I'm not in favor of a pipeline because it's continued fossil fuel, but if he has to have a pipeline, please don't put it through Bernheim. So those sample letters are up there. We are also wanting to attend the court date, and the court date is January 10th.
10th.
January 10th in Bullitt County, and we should be able to put the information about the courthouse up there, but I believe that the court hearing starts at 9 a.m. January 10th, Bullitt County. You can find that information on the website that we mentioned as well, savebernheimnow.org. So the last thing would be, we've been showing up protesting in front of LG&E. I think the past 4 weeks, we're going to take the next 2 weeks will be a break. But then again, on January 6th, come on out. We have Save Bernheim signs you can hold up. You'll find me in my bat costume because I feel so strongly about these 13 species of bats on the land. Let's have a good old-fashioned protest on out in front of LG&E on West Main, 220 West Main. So those are several things you can do in addition to signing the petition. And I guess one thing I want to make sure I mention is, we got into this, heard about it just in October that the court date was happening, and kind of rallied folks quickly. So we've got a coalition, a broad coalition of environmental groups from across the state, a lot of them based here in Louisville, but across the state. And Bernheim is grateful. They are really appreciating and needing this support right now. So please, come on out, join us, and you'll get the gratitude of Bernheim and Mark Worms, Executive Director of Bernheim, and all the Bernheim staff. I think we have elevated their spirits, re-energized them, and it's a give and take, and let's keep doing that.
Have the Giants weighed in? Are they opposed to the pipeline? Are they?
Oh, they're definitely against.
Mama is about to get up and pack that court with us.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both. We do appreciate taking time out of your holiday, festive evenings. I hope you didn't have to miss a holiday party on our behalf, but we appreciate you sharing your views, sharing your information, and we'll once again share that petition. So folks go and at a minimum add your name to that petition, or go beyond, write a letter, go even further beyond, put on a costume and show up. Whole like flock of bats. I don't think they're called flocks, but whatever, a number of bats that would definitely, I'm sure, get the corporation's attention. But thanks so much. You guys have a wonderful holiday season, and let's good luck in your fight for sure, because it's not just your fight; it's all of our fights.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you very much.
We need to kind of move on. We are over an hour, which we always like to keep it at or under an hour. But I was hoping I could turn to my friend Doug to close out the show for us.
Certainly. Thanks, Aaron. We're going to be taking a holiday break next week. We hope everyone enjoys time with family and friends, but we'll be back on January 4th with some more great information. Progress Kentucky is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State, organized as a 501c4. We're affiliated with the Indivisible Project and the Commonwealth Alliance Voter Engagement, commonly referred to as CAVE. Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, increase voter turnout, and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. Production this evening was by our own triple threat, Nato. He hosts, he produces, he writes the theme music, and he can even sing too. You can find more information and music at natosongs.com. If you miss our weekly live stream on Facebook, don't worry. You can rewatch shows and see our source links on Facebook. Or audio podcasts are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Logo and some graphic content provided by Couchfire Media. More information can be found at couchfiremedia.com. Hope to see you next week. Goodbye. Have a great Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Where's it?